Those of you aware of our country's constitutional history, Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights and habeas corpus, may think that your basic freedoms are protected under English law. Well, you'd be wrong. Our rights are being undermined and destroyed by the creation of the European Union's own system of criminal law. It is an ambitious plan that has scale and reach that is truly frightening. This is being achieved by stealth, introduced piece by piece until the intended jigsaw fits together as a whole. We are told it is necessary to combat cross-border crime and terrorism. The EU is creating its own legal institutions and legal instruments that enshrine a new EU system of criminal law that undermines and supersedes our own, centuries-old, tried and tested legal system. This video aims to show you just a few examples of how these legal powers are enforced today and what is intended for the future, and how they have seriously affected ordinary British citizens.
Many UK citizens have languished for months or years in foreign prisons without an English court having the power to prevent it. It's the result of one of the most powerful EU legal instruments, the infamous European Arrest Warrant. Since 2004, the existing extradition arrangements between member states of the EU have been replaced with a system based on execution of the European Arrest Warrant, officially known as judicial surrender. Any British citizen can be arrested in the UK and transported to the EU member state where the warrant was issued on the basis of ill-defined accusations solely on the strength of a piece of paper.
Unlike a traditional extradition request, the warrant does not have to provide any prima facie evidence of the alleged crime against the accused. It is sufficient merely to summarise the allegations. Our English and Scottish courts have no right to consider the evidence of the case or lack of it, nor any right to refuse extradition.
In 2008, Michael Turner and Jason McGoldrick were arrested on a Hungarian European arrest warrant, citing fraud over a collapse of their small marketing business in Budapest. No charges had been laid against them. They were only wanted for a preliminary investigation.
Michael and Jason were carted off to a former KGB prison in Budapest, Hungary, where they were imprisoned under very, very, very poor conditions. Now, incidentally, they were surrendered by British police to Hungarian police on British soil.
So that if you're just accused of anything, however minor it might be, right, they can come and get you, they can lock you up in one of their prisons, as they do, and they consider that to be quite normal with their own citizens, possibly for weeks, months, or even years at a time. Your family may not even know where you are or what happened to you. And there he'll be languishing in some Eastern European prison cell, wondering if he's ever going to get in front of a court or not.
Now, what they were accused of in Britain would have been in the small claims civil court, even if they'd been prosecuted at all. Now, when I went to see the prosecutor and I asked him, when is there going to be a trial date? He said, there isn't a trial date. They can be in prison for up to 4 years, awaiting trial, while the prosecutor simply gathered the evidence.
Michael was locked up there not for weeks, but for months, and in that time he wasn't even allowed to visit. You're locked in a tiny room with 4 of you 24 hours a day, and they just occasionally pass what they excuse as food through a hatch to you and so on. Completely different and completely alien to the type of things that we were used to here. You just have this belief that it's been a mistake, that there must be somebody you can turn to who's going to make it all better. And clearly that's not going to be the police.
That if you look at the examples of where the European arrest warrant is used, most of them are used for very minor offences, and some of them for matters which wouldn't even be offences in the UK. And what the establishment parties have done by signing up to the European arrest warrant and the government apparently, wrongly, is going to continue it, is that they've simply turned away 900 years of British history, going back to the days of the Magna Carta, and any British resident or citizen can simply be arrested, carted off to a foreign prison for a pretty indeterminate period of time under terrible conditions, and I and others will continue to campaign against it.
Michael was finally released from a Budapest prison in 2010, still with no charges, no trial, and it was only because of the protests and the works of William Dartmouth and his colleagues that actually allowed Michael to get any freedom at all.
The European arrest warrant has been a living nightmare for an increasing number of British citizens. This could happen to anyone. It could happen to you. For decades, the EU has been exploring the idea of a European criminal code, but it has never materialized into a formal document. Instead, the EU has developed a de facto criminal code of the worst kind, based not on clear legal definitions of offences, but on vague labels. A list of 32 offences was annexed to the legislation on the European arrest warrant and subsequently copied in the legislation on nearly every EU instrument. Some of these offences are notoriously ill-defined, like racism, xenophobia, computer-related crime, corruption or swindling.
So what does that mean in practice for British citizens? Any one of us can now be arrested, transported and imprisoned in foreign countries purely on the basis of vague accusations which don't constitute specific offences under English law. The English court has no power to protect them.
You may not recognise this building. This is the headquarters of Europol, based in The Hague. It's just one of the many EU institutions created to enforce the EU's ever-expanding legal system. Many of these less than accessible institutions have suitably covert acronyms. Cyrene, Enfast, Frontex, Eurojust and the Eurogendarmerie, to name but a few. Their purpose to create interlocking systems, institutions and police databases that serve the new EU system of criminal law. Europol is the EU's criminal intelligence agency. It employs over 1,000 staff who, as a general rule, enjoy almost complete immunity from prosecution or civil lawsuits in the execution of their duties. This is a concept unknown in English law, whereby everyone from a police constable to the Prime Minister is answerable under the law for their actions. Europol has existed since 1992, first as the Europol Drugs Unit, investigating organised drug trafficking, then as a criminal intelligence agency, dealing with any form of organised crime involving 2 or more EU member states. Since 2010, Europol competencies have been extended to cover organised crime, terrorism and many other broadly defined categories. There are no reliable safeguards to ensure that Europol does not gather intelligence on lawful political or other activities under such ill-defined headings. Given Europol's secretiveness and lack of accountability, one would not be surprised if racism was extended to include opposition to uncontrolled immigration, xenophobia, opposition to the EU, or computer crime, such as websites like WikiLeaks.
It is worth noting that the 2010 EU legislation explicitly authorised Europol to investigate such activities outside its organised crime remit without the need for any evidence of organised crime involvement.
One of the first things that Home Secretary Theresa May did in 2010 was to opt in to the European Investigation Order, the next step towards a Europe-wide police system. The EIO will empower foreign judicial authorities to require our British police forces to carry out investigations on their behalf. It is intended that they will have wide-ranging powers to put suspects under surveillance and gather evidence against them.
None of this is necessary, as current mutual cooperation agreements exist to do these things. But the difference is that one is based on cooperation and the other is based on compulsion.
Mr. Speaker, let me briefly set out the rationale by which the government has approached this decision. We believe that
the government had the right to opt out of all 135 pre-Lisbon Treaty justice and policing measures. However, they have announced that they will opt out of 100 measures but permanently opt into 35, which they say are in the national interest. Those 100 opted out measures are not important. They're largely redundant, duplicated or superseded by later legislation. The 35 opt-in measures are the most dangerous, including legal institutions and legal instruments that will enshrine and develop the new system of EU criminal law. I'm not soft on criminals. Like most people, I want to see real criminals convicted and punished. But equally important is the duty of our courts to protect the innocent. But we are surrendering our most basic protections from arbitrary arrest and imprisonment for the sake of a political ideology, that of ever closer European political union. This is possible because of the idiotic doctrine of mutual recognition, which says that all the EU member states' police, legal and judicial systems are equal. Obviously they are not, and that has been demonstrated so many times.
I believe that people in this country have been led to believe by politicians that we're all now in Europe. It's okay now, we have the European Charter on Human Rights. Everybody's signed up to it, and all standards in all European countries are now equal. That is what people have been led to believe, and that is not true. The differences between finding yourself in front of the court system or prison system in somewhere like Romania, Bulgaria, in Hungary, is completely and radically different to what it is in our country.
This year we celebrate the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, but these celebrations will be a sham. The central provision of Magna Carta was the protection of the individual against the arbitrary power of the state. Those protections have been swept away with such measures as the European arrest warrant, and the door is open for much more to follow. In November 2014, Parliament had the opportunity to reject a large number of these EU powers, but sadly and predictably, the Conservative, Labour and Lib Dem parties voted to permanently enshrine them in UK law. Our criminal justice system is now subject to the European Union. Henceforward, the final authority will not be our own courts and Parliament, but the politicised European Court of Justice. The only way we can restore our ancient freedoms and protections under English law is to leave the European Union.